Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. And if you love creepy stories with relaxing rain sounds, don't forget to check out my second channel. I upload hour-long creepy tales every other day. Links in the description. Now, let's get into today's story. So this happened when I was in 7th grade, a 12-year-old at the time. It was just my mom, my brother, and me living on a rental in a rundown low-income area. Moved in during the summer before the school year started, and were welcome to be our next door neighbors, which wasn't too uncommon, but not super common at decent time for that area in Oregon. My mom worked 8 o'clock a.m. to 5 p.m. every day, so my little brother and I would ride Thebus home every day from school. A cousin would also sometimes ride back to the house with us, and her parents would pick her up later one day when I came home and noticed her only small laptop that we owned was gone off the counter. I figured me mom had moved it later when my mom came home. We determined it was missing and that a lot of other things were missing, like my iPod and my wallet, and even my mom's safe with her handgun in it. And lots of family valuables. We called the cops and reported a robbery, and they came to investigate. They determined the person probably slid through the doggy door leading into Fegridge, and then entered the house through our unlocked garage door. Cops stayed in their cars on the curb all night and said they would keep watch over our house more than normal. I was terrified all night, and my brother, and I lived in my mom's room the next day. Well, at all of our doors, it was Wednesday and a random half day at my school, so I rode the bus home around noon, and Micahson came with, while my brother went to a friend's house for the afternoon to hang out. I used the key under the mat that my mom leaves for me and my cousin, and I hung out for about an hour or twaddle. Her mom came and picked her up after she left. I heard the doorknob off the closet right next to the front door slowly open, and out came the skinny man who looked like he was 35 years old, and one I recognized as our next door neighbor. He seemed to be constantly shaking, had intense eyes, and had eerily unhealthy look at him, because Ophis extremely sunken in face terrified him. In the living room, just standing looking at him, while he looks at me with a surprised look on his face. I think he thought everyone left when my cousin did until his face changed to an amused smirk when I believe he realized that I was alone in the house. He begins to walk towards me, while I stand there shocked and sure what to do. He grabs me really hard on the shoulders and tells me that I am pretty. He then begins to pull mine to him too. I think lick me. I don't know, seemed crazy and excitable with his intense eyes. I instinctively jump and buckle my knees to allow my full weight to be the force that rips me from his grip, and I follow my butt. He then bends down for me when I heel kick him in the nuts as hard as I can. Note that I played soccer at the time and practiced wrestling with older neighbor kids. Alothy then yells and falls to his knees cupping himself. I use that time to run past him to my front door. I open it and run to a kid. I rode the bus with house about 6 houses down. He and his mom were there, and she called the cops and me mom while I waited. The cops got to the house, and he wasn't there, but had managed to steal a few more small valuables. I gave my testimony that it was our next door neighbor, and he was later caught that same day selling some of our stuff at the pawn shop in town. He ended up being a crystal meth addict, stealing our stuff to sell and pay for his addiction. He was super weak from all drug abuse, which is probably why I was able to get him away. He was also apparently somewhat high, which had claimed heightened him sexually, which is why he spontaneously decided to attack me, being that I was alone, although he looked like he was in his late or mid-30s. He was only 26. He had apparently watched us for a few months, learning our schedules for when we left and got home. He took the time to take the key from under the mat while we were gone, get Akapi, and then put the original back under it for my brother and me to use when we got home. Cops were surprised. He was smart enough to do that, as he seemed to be mostly dim-witted with everything else due to the drug abuse. Either way, I testified against his physical attack, and he got a few decades of jail time, seeing that he was already on parole for drugs. I was terrified and slept in Mama's room for the next year. I have been working for an independent hotel for just over 4 years. Now we're at #1 rated hotel in our city. We're proud of it. I mostly work in housekeeping, but I've done some time at the front desk as well. I love my job, and have always. Said that my boss is arrogant now being a housekeeper. I've seen some things. See, I've seen a room where some Eon snuck on their dog, kitten, and chicken. We don't allow pets. I once had a room that I was cleaning as a stay over it. Had tripods set up around the bed, professional camera equipment cases, and adult-sized passer on site, and 40-sized children's diapers. The 2 people fatware in that room were in their early 20s. I even had a room once that we had to call the cops on for a raid because we found meth. They found a lot of drugs and guns in that room. But today is the first time I've ever actually felt scared to be in a guest room. I'm working on a room that's already being vacated. A man in the next room overcatches me at my supply cart. He's set Tobe staying for several days and tells me, "You can go ahead and clean my room. Now I'm going down for breakfast." Excellently love getting my stayovers done early on. It makes things easier for the people working laundry. The sooner we get that dirty laundry down to them, so I pop over into his room, opening it up and propping the door open with a stopper like wheelways. The first thing I noticed is that he has around 20 prescription bottles lined up on one of the 2 bed salon with insulin and needles. Seemed nosy, I'll admit it, and I wanted to see what he was on. Oddly, they were on Litwall, different types of medication. For all 20 bottles, about 2/3 were a diabetes medication, and the rest were cholesterol medication. A little weird that he has so many bottles of the same meds, but whatever. I go to make the bed and see that some of the bedding has been stained, and I sigh, knowing now I'll have to change all the bedding instead of just being able to turn down the sheets and blanket. So I leave the room, closing it behind me, go get the linens I need, and head right back to the room. I prop the door open again, and had to set clean linens on the desk chair when I see out of the corner of my eye 2 notes sitting on the TV desk. It wouldn't mean anything except I caught the word kill scrolled on it. I dropped the linen sand, took a closer look. What I read on first note made my blood run cold. "You don't have to forgive her. You just can't kill her. You are here to take money and alcohol away from you. Get over having to kill her, and you can safely leave." My heart was pounding. My eyes went to the second note, which had just looked like a to-do list at first glance, but in then made my stomach churn. Spray and wash apply for Medicare insubordination. Soul is healed by being with children. Bank card follow-up inheritance savings. Montana. There will be a day of reckoning. Gajoodle mom, what I said. How did Bev get my address? It was too much. I quickly snipped pictures of them on my phone so I could show my boss why I would not clean his room. I left the room quickly, closing it up behind me. As the door closes, I turn, and I see the man just 10 feet away from me coming back to his roomie. Heart is in my throat, but I manage Tosmo and tell him I need more supplies. He'll be back to your room in a bit. I take off straight for the elevator, having noticed our maintenance man waiting for the slow transport in a hushed tone. I tell him what I found, and he seems shaken. Not a normal state for me. He rides down with me. I go straight to me boss and tell her that for the first time in all these years I'm not comfortable being in a guest room. I show her the pictures, and her face is still pale. She goes to the front desk and asks our general manager for a minute of her time, and brings her into the FSA to show her she agreed this was not a safe situation, and took our maintenance man with her to go inform the man he had 1 hour to get his belongings and leave the hotel, and he was not welcome back. I spent a few minutes in the laundry room trying to calm him down, and then my boss went back up with me to Theffler until the man was officially out of the hotel. This memory of mine begins about 3 years ago. When I graduated high school, I had grown up with my grandparents, but decided to move to a different and much larger city to live with my dad for the first time in 12 years. I somewhat knew the city already, because I spent summers with him, but this would be the first time I would have the freedom of an adult to come and go as I please, drive my car anywhere, and smoke cigars whenever I wanted. I was excited, though sad, to leave all my friends as soon as I was settled. Then my dad and stepmom sat me down to discuss the few rules and what I needed to know about the complex basic things like go wherever you want, but let us know when you leave or when you're coming back, even if it's 2 o'clock and you'll have to park on the street because the apartment complex has limited parking. Gone more thing. There's the neighborhood creep. This guy George was well known to all the women in the complex, as well as the police that patrolled the area. He was a fairly big guy and very intimidating. Parents were pretty certain that he would leave me Alone for one reason, my dad thought. George had a habit of stalking other women in the complex. He would stop and find a new target if they had a man make. A show of being in their place, a brother, a lover, or a father. It didn't matter what he was to the woman, or Wade looked like George would back off immediately. Since I lived with my dad, who is also quite tall and rather big, I also felt confident that I would be all right, and I was for a time. It started about 6 months after I moved in. Miss Tipman and Dad were fighting a lot more until she got up and left him one night. I was sitting on my porch, having a cigarette and browsing Facebook or whatever. Wish I could say that I felt like I was being watched, but I probably just looked up because I felt a bug or something. George was standing about 15 feet away, a little bit behind a tree, staring intently at me. I nearly dropped me cigarette shakily. I stubbed it out and went inside. I was home alone, so I made sure to lock all my doors and then played a video game in my room. I told myself that I was probably just paranoid. The next morning, I got up from my morning cigarette and coffee low, and behold, minutes after, I got onto my porch. George came ambling out of his apartment to look me way. I sucked down my cigarette and went back inside. This pattern continued for a couple of weeks. It was like George just stood at a sliding glass door, peeking down, waiting to see when I would pop out. He told my dad about it, and he tried to stay with me whenever I went to smoke. Ife came with me. George wouldn't even peep his head out of his door. Of course, other women in the complex have already tried to call the police above him, but he lives in the complex, and staring isn't a crime, so there wasn't much they could do. I didn't know how far George had taken it with the other women. Therefore, with that info in mind, I knew calling wouldn't be much use. Things slowly escalated. Once my stepmom left, I had access to her parking spot, so I had 3 ways to get from my car to my apartment, depending on how I parked. Enough the ways went just past George's apartment, about 5 feet from his door. Since I got off work late most nights, I avoided that route as much as possible. Slow but surely, like he memorized my schedule. He would be on one of the paths when I was coming home, not directly on concrete, but a few feet away on the grass behind a tree. It was like he thought I couldn't see him. Picture Occult hiding very terribly behind a tree. You can see 90% of their body, and you know that they are there. That's how he will do it. I would rush past him, avoid eye contact, and prepare to scream if I heard him come after me. I started to carry my keys between my fingertips, on a pocket knife, and I would walk from my car with it halfway open already. Even though I've never been in any kind of fight in my life around this time, I believe my mom was trying to find free self-defense classes. Since I couldn't afford to buy anything, my dad was steadily getting more and more pissed off as George edged closer and closer to escalating as the days went by. It went from November to May. If my dad wasn't home, I would lock my bedroom door and keep my knife under my pillow. I would Skype all night with my boyfriend just so someone could call 911 for me if need be. I put a bunch of flower pots in front of my bedroom window so no one could get in silently. I started sitting on the floor of my porch below the wall, out of sight to smoke, but angled so I could see him if he walked up to it. Nightmares of being kidnapped or murdered started to invade my sleep for a night. Then one day my neighbor Shaw was gossiping to me. Did you hear about George Noel? He got arrested last night in the complex parking lot. There's a big sort of electrical power box. It stands about waist height and is perhaps 2 or 3 feet wide, about 10 minutes spori. I was supposed to come home and park right in front of it. Some lady with her kid walking by saw George sitting on the box masturbating. Was he waiting there for me, jerking off to the thought of me seeing him? The thought makes me want to puke and scares me all at the same time. I was relieved for a few days of my stress, but it was only a few days that he was gone. Then he was back, and he went right back to the same old routine. One night got far braver. It was maybe 7 o'clock p. When I went out for a cigarette with my dad, a neighbor walked up to chat with me dad, and George came outside and stood out in the open, staring me down. Dude's asking to get his ass kicked, my dad said under his breath, and he shouted to the neighbor. Some more. I rolled my eyes, went inside, and played some more video games. Was healing in a World of Warcraft dungeon when I heard Shell shouting, "Where are you?" But I was healing pretty important job, and I figured she was talking to someone else until she burst into my room in a panic. Her eye showed. She hopped from foot to foot frantically, like she was doing the potty dance. "He's bleeding." Who? I asked in bewilderment. "Your dad come." Quickie made some teenager huffing sounds and left my computer, certainly pissing off the rest of the group. I grabbed our little first aid kit filled with band-aids. I thought in my mind that my dad was doing something stupid, like tossing up his pocket knife and trying to catch it. But when I stepped outside, I found myself face to face with a real horror. About 6 people surrounded my dad, including Shell and my neighbor Caleb. Held a shirt to my dad's side. He was facing away from me, and his entire back was just covered in blood. It looked like he had been mauled by a bear. That was seriously my first thought. He didn't know we had bears in the city. Caleb's hold on the shirt slipped and blood sprayed. I feel queasy writing this down. I've never in my life been the person people turn to in an emergency. Blood makes me lightheaded. And I have anxiety attacks over not being able to find a specific bookmark. But all Thettles, people around 30 to 40, while I was just 18 around me, were panicked aside from Caleb. I needed to be the person that people turn to. I threw the first aid kit onto the porch and told Shell where we keep our towels, Cherish, to go grab one. Has anybody called 911? I shouted. 5 pair of eyes looked to turn at me like they'd never heard of the cops before. No, my dad said. I can't afford an ambulance. Shut up, I said. What happened? That weirdo stabbed me. SOI dialed 911 and relayed her address and reason for the emergency. The operator used to keep applying pressure to the wound on my father's lower back. My dad is a true champ, even though the sidewalk was just one big puddle of blood. Gross stayed on his feet until someone thought to run and get him a chair. I ran back and forth along the walkway to get police and showed them the house that George lived in. And then I ran back and forth to get the paramedics. They were so cold and so agonizing. Laszlo, they walked calmly, and I wanted to scream at them to run. My dad could be bleeding. Now, don't you care? I learned later that they don't run, because if they let adrenaline kick in, mistakes can happen. They shoved Caleb out of the way because he refused to let go of my dad's wand and got him packed into the ambulance. I was about to jump on when Paula stopped me and told me that I had to stay so I could give my statement. My dad shouted at me to call his boss, and he remembered all his allergies and whatnot from the paramedics. It's been 2 years since this, and all these details have been burned into my brain. I gave misstatement to the police. Then they made him sit outside the complex on the sidewalk for 2 to 3 hours. They kept him updated on my dad. Once I had Colette's boss, my boss, and answered Miss Tepman's message, that's when I allowed Miss to break down. It felt like I cried forever. One of the cops was nice enough to go into my house and grab my cigarettes and a bottle of water for me. Stayed with me the entire time to make sure I didn't run off or something, but he was very nice. He offered to let me sit in his cruiser a few times to get away from the cold. George was waiting in his apartment when they came, and they took him out to where I was, and there were 14 cop cars. He still kept trying to stare at me. I stared right back and felt such hatred that I have never felt in my life. I wanted to go over there and murder him. My babysitting cop looked over and saw that George was staring, so used his flashlight to keep George from being able to look at me. Once it was all over, I was allowed to go back to my house, where I waited for information about my dad. I gathered the story from my neighbors while he was in the hospital for 9 days. He had shouted at George to leave his daughter alone, and George had shouted back at him while I was in the house, totally unaware. George said something along the lines of, "Can't tell that," to my face like a man. So my dad hopped over the porch and waltzed up to him. The creep had been waiting with a 12-inch blade held to the side of his leg, struck out with his empty hands, and then got my dad in the back with a knife. It missed his kidney, very narrowly traveled up and punctured his lung and damaged his diaphragm. Dad didn't realize he had been stabbed at first. He got George into a headlock and pummeled the shit out of Fiend, thinking the dude had just punched at him in the kidney. George dropped the knife, rolled into the grass, picked up another knife he had been hiding, and stabbed my dad again, this time in the upper back. This wound was much more shallow, but still required stitches. Later at this point, Shell came outside and screamed to my dad that he was bleeding. Took off his shirt, got pissed, and threw it at George. At that point, any boar stalker put his hands up and went to his apartment. The blood stayed on the pavement until about noon the next day, when my neighbors kindly washed it off for me. I still have pictures in me email of it, as well as my dad's injuries. My dad spent more time in the hospital in critical condition than George spent being held in jail. I feel like it was my fault. I've been addressing that in therapy, but I still feel awful about. It all like my dad had to fight my own battle for me. Throughout the week, while I was on my porch or just outside, I had so many women come up to him. They all told me to thank my dad for them. They had all been terrorized by George at some point, yet now they were certain he would be away for good several poor women had George stalked them up to their apartment door and pull his pants down, demanding sex. I can't believe cops couldn't do anything. One of those days, one of my neighbors came up to tell me that the police in neighborshed searched the complex and found that George had stashed many knives all over the place, buried in gardens, stuck behind trees under his doormat. I shudder to think that he might have planned to one day grab one of his targets and do something far more sinister than Stera. George was declared guilty of battery with a deadly weapon, but the attempted murder charge was dropped. He was out officing by Christmas on good behavior or whatever, but my dad and I have a lifelong restraining order against him. He's never tried to come after me, so I can only hope that he's terrified of my dad. I wish I could tell you guys that he took self-defense classes and learned to fight the way my dad can, but I'm still a pussy who can't even slap a spider. So others that my dad is doing all right now. He just had his third surgery on Tuesday, trying to repair the damaged tornado. Him internally, we're hoping that this will be his last, and his quality of life will vastly improve. I probably owe my life to my dad. If he hadn't fought George for me, maybe I would have been the first victim he stabbed. I'm a 27-year-old female. I graduated school about 10 years ago. In my freshman year of high school, I was well-known and had lots of friends. I was very friendly, and so every time I saw someone alone, I would greet them and offer them my friendship. Sometime during the year of my math class, we had a new guy. We'll call him Jose. Jose had recently moved to the U.S. from Mexico. I hardly knew any English. Me being Hispanic, I was able to speak to him in Spanish and make him feel welcome. Joe's had no friends and always sat by himself, and at math class one started helping out Jose a lot. He sat behind me and would always play with my hair. Not actually my head, but my hair, so I could hardly feel it. I sort of felt like he had a crush on, and he wasn't bad looking though. I didn't look at it as a big deal for a few months. 2 to 3 months he played with my hair. It became a norm. He said he really liked my hair towards the end of those months. He said he wanted to play a game and asked me to write the things I loved the most in life. He would do threesome, and we would both share papers, of course. I wrote down my family, god friends, and a whole bunch of other things. I gave him back the list. He wanted specific names, and he said he would do the same. I ended up writing my friends and family's names. One day we were just hanging out in class, and Jose said, "Can he show you something, but you can't tell anyone, or else you're going to have to pay for it." I was so confused. I thought maybe he was going to ask me out. Joe pulled out a Ziploc bag, and I couldn't really tell what was in it. It wasn't until he placed it on the table that he noticed it was a Ziploc bag full of hair. My hair, he just pulled up his sleeve and showed his arm. He had a bunch of scars. There was a fresh wound, and he grabbed my hair and placed it on top of the freshly opened wound from the night before and said, "You are mine now. I know who you loving, what you love if you don't. Do as I say, you'll pay for everything these aerial of the scars. And these are the souls that I owe anything and everything that happens from now on. Think of me." My heart sank. He started smiling. I ran out of the class crying and ran to the office. Everybody was so confused. I had to speak to my counselor. Immediately I explained what had happened. Jose was pulled out of class, taken to the principal's office, and expelled. That day feared for my life. They found all these notes of other people in his backpack. Mine was there. I saw the scars and found my hair. I never heard of Jose gang. I had some pretty messed up shit happen in my life after that. I always thought of Jose. I haven't talked to Boothus in years. I'm afraid that if I mention it, he will hear me and more bodies to follow. I got so close with God, closer than ever, after this, until this day. I don't know if Jose was just messing with me, but I will tell you that after that encounter, I am no longer the super friendly and open-hearted person I was. For a little background, I'm a 27-year-old female, and I recently just moved into a nice apartment in a safe neighborhood with my 2 dogs. Charles and Wigwam. Charles is a Corgi German Shepherd mix and is the most loving, beautifully obnoxious dog, while Wigwam is a Lhasa. who is quiet, sweet, and most definitely scared shitless of his own shadow. I've only been in my new place for about a month, and after this experience, I highly doubt I'm going to make it here for the duration of my year-long lease. The way these apartments are set up is that each floor has its own set of doors that lead to 4 apartments, and a fire escape door fatally opens from the inside. I'm on the back side of the building, which placed me patio about 10 NFT from the fire escape. Stairs, I take my dogs out 3 times a day, midnight being the latest. I will go out by myself, and every time I leave my apartment, I put the bar lock on me patio door and lock my front door without fail. About a week ago, we had a snowstorm, and I had cracked my patio door because, well, I love cold weather and I'm an adult, and if I want to watch snowfall, then I can do as I please. Mistake number 1. I let my guard down because I'm a stubborn. It was around 11 o'clock p.m. and I decided that since it was getting late, I should tuck these dogs out for the night. And since they both hate snow, this would be a quick trip. I go to lock the patio door and decide against it because I'm on the freaking 5th floor and I'm only going to be outside for a few minutes. I get dogs ready, grab my keys, and lock my door. As I leave the apartment, I get down to the designated pet area with my beloved snowfall dogs and let them do their thing. Then back to the apartment we go, and we get back in safely. This is where I thought I was losing my mind. But in actuality, shit was about to get real soon. As we walk into the apartment, my dogs run over to the patio door, and I notice the door is shut and the bar ice locked. Mistake number 2. I immediately think that's strange, but I don't connect dots. I go into the kitchen to get my dog treats, and both dogs start going batshit crazy and growling at a large cedar chest in my living room. And as I'm walking to see what all the commotion is about, I see a pair of eyes creeping from under the chest. Lady stood there for about 5 seconds before I realized what I was seeing, and calmly walked backwards to my front door, opened it, and told my dogs, "Let's go outside." And they ran out without leashes, and immediately got them and myself in my car, locked the doors, and called the police. They showed up in less than 5 minutes, and they go up to my apartment, and after about 20 minutes, 2 officers there, dragging a 40-ish-year-old fucked out my building in cuffs, and the plothickentious dude had been watching me since I moved in and had been staking out my place, waiting for an opportunity to get inside because he knew I lived alone. If that's not creepy enough already. He had a fanny pack, since it's still 1990, and had a pocket knife, needles, ketamine, and a picture of me from the day I moved in. And his plan was to sneak in through me patio, wait for me to fall asleep. And who knows what else. Needless to say, I didn't sleep for days because I thought would come back. Luckily, the bastard is still in jail, but I'll never forget this eyes